Hey everybody, it's Matt from the house, and in this video we're going to show you a little bit about how a snowboard actually works. Just break it down to the basics. Let's check this out. A lot of people don't realize that there's a lot that goes into a snowboard. There's a lot of geometry, a lot of math. Kids, pay attention in math class and in science class. This is how you get into this industry of making snowboards. But there is a lot that goes into it, and there's some basic stuff that kind of makes sense to how a snowboard rides. So right off the bat, there's a lot of things that go into a snowboard with the geometry of the board. And that's basically just how long the board is, how wide the board is, this side cut, also the flex of the board too. And varying different flexes obviously do different things. But in general, with a snowboard, how it works is that your board has some flex to it. It also has the side cut. Those are the most important things. So how stiff a board is basically how easy it is to get the board on and off edge. And also if you can ride faster and harder. Softer boards have a little bit smoother, easier ride. One's not better than the other, they're just different. Also the side cut. So the side cut here, it's basically part of a circle. So if we actually look on this Evol piece board, if we look at this piece symbol, this is obviously a circle. So that side cut essentially is that area in between my fingers. That's how much the side cut is. It's a very, very small portion of a circle. So if you have a tighter circle, that's gonna be a deeper side cut. So that means you can carve harder on your board. And we'll show you how that works in just a second. With the snowboard, basically, your board rides flat. You've got it sitting on the snow. You've got this base material. It's basically the friction of this going along the snow is basically helping to melt the snow just a tiny, tiny bit. And then the wax repels it and you're cruising down the hill. Now, when you're turning on a snowboard, how that's gonna work is you're basically, if you look at this snowboard, when we actually tip this up, obviously if that side cut is part of a circle, it's gonna be an arc. And you can actually see my fingers fit underneath it here, but they don't fit under it up here. So again, it's basically an arc. So what we need to do to get that board to turn and to actually utilize that edge properly, and this is when you're actually carving on your edge. When you're sliding your turns, that's a little bit easier and it's a little bit different, but it is similar. But in general, what happens is you take this board, and you can actually see that black area underneath the board. That's basically the shadow from behind here. When you flex the board and push it down, we're actually touching that side cut. So now you can see there's no black area underneath, there's no shadow. So what that is that's basically you touching the edge to the snow, and the board is traveling on that circle. If you lean on it a little bit, you're actually utilizing part of the side cut. The harder you lean on it, the more you're flexing the board, the more of that side cut you're using. And that's why when you've got those smaller circles, if you think about that, that's a little bit tighter radius, and that's gonna be a quicker side cut. Whereas if you've got a bigger circle, it's a little more elongated, and that's not gonna carve as much. It's gonna be a little bit more longer swooping carves. But again, it depends on the snowboard itself as to exactly how much side cut it is. Not a thing that you need to worry about too much. Usually your boards that are meant for hard carving are gonna have deeper side cuts, and those boards that are meant for just out cruising, they're gonna have the mellower side cuts. So that's basically gonna come with the board. It's not a spec that you need to really, really pay attention to when you're buying a snowboard. But again, that's how that board works. And then also, if you think about this, when the board is flexing, it's pushing back. So if you're actually going faster and you're turning harder, there's actually more pressure. Think about if you're in a car and you take a turn and you're sitting on the outside of that turn. Obviously you feel yourself go towards the side of the door. If you take that turn faster and harder, you feel more pushing you, and the centrifugal force is actually working. And again, same thing on a snowboard. When you're actually turning faster and you're riding faster, this board has to push back more too, because you are putting more pressure on the board. If the board is too soft and you're trying to carve too hard, that's when the board washes out. Because obviously when we push this thing down, it's pushing back. So we need that board to be able to push back, and if it can't, what it does is it doesn't hold an edge, but it starts to slide out from underneath you. So the last time that you felt your board slide out from underneath you, you either were going too fast or your board is just too soft, or obviously a combination of those two. Or sometimes it could just be the conditions. But if you're out on a standard groomed trail and you do take a hard carve on a really soft board, it's gonna give out on you. Also, you need to ride faster when you have stiffer boards too, because you do have more energy loaded into the board, so you need to get that board off the edge. Think back to some of those days when you were first learning and you're trying to figure out your snowboard, and as soon as you tipped the board up and you actually got it on edge and you weren't ready for it, and the board kind of corked you into the ground. It basically just carved and you knelt down or you sat down, because it did. It grabbed grab that edge. But again, you weren't going fast enough. You didn't have enough energy loaded into the board to actually get the board off of the edge. So again, the flex does come into play. And when you are buying snowboards and you look at those flexes, that's a big, big thing. Softer flexes are for nice, easier riding, usually for beginners or a lot of park riders too. Park guys don't usually like really stiff boards because they want something that's nice and easy flowing. You come off of a jump, you come off the end of a rail and you land and you're a little off kilter, especially if you're spinning off of it. You usually don't want a board that's going to jump on edge. You want something that's going to have a nice, easy feel. But likewise, when you are riding in more extreme conditions, you're going to need something that can react very, very quick, and you are going to be riding faster and harder. So traditionally, the style of board you ride, it's going to have a flex and it's going to have a side cut that kind of goes along with it. All right, and as for the overall shape of the board, up in the nose and the tail too, you're going to see some variances. Usually when you're riding boards that you're pretty much riding one direction, they're going to be directional boards, so it's going to look like, you know, it goes only that way. And you can pretty much ride just about any board, regular and switch, as long as those tails are kicked up just a little bit. That's all you need. A lot of people think too that if you actually go lean too far on a board, you're actually going to catch that nose, and it's actually not true. Pretty cool thing is actually, if we look at this, we set this up, you can see that the nose is actually lifted, but you'll notice that when I actually flex this board and I push down on it, it actually lifts the nose up more. So again, if you lean forward on a board that has a little bit of kick, or if you're riding switch on a board that does have a very, very short, shallow kick, you're not going to catch that kick if you lean too far forward. It's actually going to flex the board and lift it up even more. You actually have to have all your weight off of the board to catch that nose. But the kicks and the shapes of the boards, you get into those twin tip boards, obviously both ends are shaped exactly the same. If you ride this way and this way, it's gonna ride exactly the same. If you took your bindings and mounted them up backwards, your board's not gonna ride any different. But you do get into those directional shapes, and sometimes those are actually meant to ride better in one direction. So if you do spend most of your time riding with your right foot forward or riding with just your left foot forward, those directional boards are gonna benefit you, and they're actually meant to ride in one direction. Again, not that you can't ride it switch, but that's what they're there for. And then, you know, some of these shapes too, like these little swallowtails and stuff like that, like the piece has that little cutout in the nose and tail. It's pretty much there just for looks. But technically we are getting rid of material on the nose and the tail. That is going to get rid of some weight on the board. Also, if you do get this thing into some deeper snow, if you had more material on the tail, it's gonna wanna sit up more. If you take that material away, it's actually gonna sit down a little bit more. So, not that you're gonna take this board out and go ride POW all day long on it, but if this board did have that extra material, technically this version with a little bit of that swallowtail in there is actually going to sit down a little bit lower on the tail, because that part's the part that's sitting down in the snow, and it's actually going to ride a little bit better than if it did have that extra material. But again, when you're looking at some of the park boards, usually those shapes are just there for fun. There's even some park boards that have directional shapes, because when you're riding flat snow, the nose and the tail, they don't matter. They're not touching the snow. You could ride this board all day long, ride on flat snow, have a blast. If you came in and I cut 2 inches off the tail of this board, again, we're still up in the kick there, and you go out and ride that flat snow all day long again, you're not gonna notice a difference. It's not gonna feel any different than it does here. Although, if you did get in some deep snow, taking away that tail material is gonna actually make the back sit down a little bit more. You're gonna see a lot of that in the volume shift boards, where the directional shape is a thing and it helps you when you need it to help, but a lot of those boards will feel more twin than you think. Great example, the Ride Warpig. If you look at that board, it's got a lot more nose. If you actually measure from inserts to nose and inserts to tail, there's way more nose than there is tail. However, the stance itself is actually centered up on your side cut. So if you ride it on flat snow, it's actually gonna ride and carve and feel more like a twin tip board than you think. Okay, so that's the basics on a snowboard and how it works. Again, it's pretty cool. It's basically a combination of how much your board flexes and how this side cut works and how it digs into the snow. There's a lot of other things that go on to make the boards ride differently. This is basically how pretty much every snowboard rides, but anything beyond that, taper, the rocker versus the camber, all of that stuff, we've got some videos, we'll leave some links in the description to that stuff. But again, in general, that's pretty much how every single snowboard works. You flex the board, you set your edge, and you carve on that circle. But if you've got any questions beyond what we talked about in the video, leave some comments down below. We're on there every single day trying to answer your questions. You know, we want to make sure we get you into some rad gear, but most importantly, we want to make sure that's actually going to fit you and your riding style. Also make sure to like, subscribe, definitely get that notification bell on too so you can find out when all the new videos drop. And no matter what kind of rider you are, grab a board and get out and ride, because any day of riding is a good day of riding.